like chronic, like a dissociative personality disorder, where that's okay. Okay. Uh, I can't say too. Yeah, I can't say too much. Like occasionally, sometimes, and that's tough. That's a tough one actually. Having too much dissociation. Have lately you felt that way? You're just really are you compartmentalizing something that you don't want to deal with or confront? Dissociation tends to be a very protective skill that one practices a lot because there are a lot of stressors that they don't want to encounter too much. That's a common thing, but not necessarily your thing, right? I'm just suggesting dissociation tends to be a coping mechanism that is used really often when there's too many stressors around a person's like lifestyle that they get really, really well practiced in compartmentalizing the things. So when they do something, they're like, all right, that's done. Sure, it's gone, it's past. It doesn't weigh on the person and it becomes lack of a learning experience and whatnot. And then it starts feeling like a waste of time. So that's kind of like the dangerous cycle that I deal with, that I see when it comes to dissociation. You kind of are. There was a little digression about uh, forgive and forget, but instead it can be taken to extreme where when you get something done, you wash your hands off of it. It no longer feels weight on the person. So incredible use of compartmentalization can create dissociation from your actions, your lifestyle, your life in general. I feel that way almost every time I do. Sometimes I don't do usually. What I try to do with it is share those actions and try to look for feedback so it feels more and more mine. That doesn't help very much. Yeah. So yeah, being dissociated also comes with passive living too. Um the best encouragement I could think of, like the most appropriate thing I can think of, is that you well, not the best thing, but the first thing that comes to mind is if there's finding the trigger, like what is the motivation to dissociate things, right? So like perhaps um for many the dissociation is uh the use of time or the over prioritization of significance is what I would say the most common thing when it comes to dissociation these days, where you have prioritized what importance is and you stick strictly to that importance. So instead of looking for a significance and importance of your past actions while you're doing those actions, as long as they don't relate to your priority of importance, you continue to dissociate yourself from them. So it becomes over time very, very habit forming to say they're not important enough. There's just not too many things are important enough. So if that sounds very familiar, um, and occurs very often, the idea would be to try to go through a path of self discovery in which you can find meaningful ways to habitually find importance in things that may seem irrelevant. And that's usually going through a path of if you're not afraid of getting angry or sad or something, a lot of times finding things that make you angry and not dissociating from it can help. Like why does this make me sad? Why does this make me angry? Why does this make me happy? It can help with exploring what is causing the dissociation. That's just, it sounds very general because it will require you to trust someone with a lot of information so that they can see what specifically it is. But the idea is dissociation comes from a lack of investment. Um, and it's very protective. So, um, a lot of times, people who are incredibly stressed out, that's how they cope with it. You think the trigger is getting out of normal state of things, meaning either I did something well or really bad, and I can't even track that happening throughout past years? Oh, that's rough. You have to start somewhere, I suppose. And starting somewhere would be to try to find significance in the little things. I talked about this digression a little bit before about peering too far in the past for reflection and peering too far in the future for like consequence or goals, and trying to go through discovery about appreciating the little things could allow one to find significance in all the immediate things. And then that will give you a lot of time to take in a bunch of ways to make things significant. Like, I have a great example. For streamers, right? For content creators, like, the difference between someone who streams consistently, independent of what they're streaming, is someone who can find significance in pretty much anything they do without the validation or affirmation of others. However, if you somehow determine that that's not sufficient enough to prevent yourself from dissociating from what you're doing, like finding meaning and importance in your actions, you seek other affirmation and forms of confirmation, which you already said you do. You look for feedback and make it feel more by getting affirmation and stuff. But the idea is that should be used as a window to tell you to learn and demonstrate. It should be interesting. You should become interested in how others are finding it significant. And maybe you can try to take inspiration from that and see if you can apply it yourself. So you're trying to reach a state where you have finally been able to do it without the affirmation of others again. And it's not like you weren't able to, but when you get too rehearsed in dissociation, in my opinion, and too protective over time, that becomes the automatic habit, right? You're well more practiced in doing this and safeguarding yourself, so you become numb. And I would say there was a time in my life that I have encountered and was worried that I was having a dissociative personality disorder. It's a little different from just dissociation, is where I'm a yes man for the longest time. Like, I just say yes to everything, and all the motivations that I was doing those things are things I receive from others. So over time, I was questioning, did I even do this for myself? Like, so there was a point where I started realizing maybe there's nothing that defines me from what I do. So I need others to give me something to do, so I would do it. And then they'd be happy. And then I would look for the next thing. So all the tasks, objectives, and value is not coming from myself, because I'm just doing things that are instructed. But over time, what I have found is I'm trying to find meaning in that's provided by others. So now I start extracting meaning from those tasks and then add them to myself. So the idea is you already are open-minded enough to take feedback from others. The goal now is to, at least What's encouraged is you spend that time maybe possibly even imitating them. Being able to imitate someone in their shoes can provide the perspective that's enough to work on. You're looking for little sparks of interest. And it's kind of like going through deleting your YouTube algorithm history. Look at the random stuff and hope that, hey, this person did this for 100 days straight. And they remember like all the details of it, and it feels like it gives them life and meaning every day they do it, even though they're doing it for 100 days or 1,000 days. And the idea is try to extract something that works for you. I don't know what that is, but for me, my goal was to make sure that one day when I live alone, have my own choices, which eventually I did, right? Because I stopped having to go down the path of getting good grades, a career and stuff. That has been paved, right? But once that ends, the idea is you're supposed to be able to guide your own self. But if you're like dissociating yourself from an objective that's set for you and what you really want to do, it can be very difficult to get back to the rhythm of what do I want to do today? And when I do it, does it mean anything, or do I just forget about it and then go on to tomorrow? Right? So over time, it'll get longer. It'll be months, years. And then you start looking back, it's like, what did I do with the last couple of years of my life? What am I going to do in the next couple of years? So the goal, in my opinion, or very encouraged, is trying to see inspiration in others. You could interact directly with them too, but more on the micro level, like focusing on the present, right? Trying to be present in life, because dissociation, the most dangerous thing about dissociation is you lose the enthusiasm to get up each day, do something that's significant for you. Get up knowing you're going to do something significant for yourself. When you start dissociating from everything, the like the thing why dissociation is popular is that you're trying to protect yourself. So to protect yourself, though, ironically or counterintuitively, while you're protecting yourself, you also become really, really skilled at making everything not hurt you. At the same time, everything that makes you happy and encouraging and motivation also gets protected. It's not a good things come in and bad things stay out kind of thing. When you start dissociating chronically, good things don't come in either, as well as bad things. It protects you, but it also prevents you from getting better, like feeling better. So the good things that, like, people compliment you or maybe they get mad at you, yes, dissociation will prevent someone from getting mad at, like, that bad stimuli from getting to your nerves, right? Like someone insulted you for doing a really bad job or something. That dissociation protects you from that. It allows you to sort of forgive yourself. It's a little different. It just prevents you from even reacting to it. And then any compliments, anything you do well, it's also guarded from that. So you don't get any trafficking, and it might dull the senses. And I have done that before, but in a different context, where I do work for someone. It's done, great. I don't really feel like anything. I just did it for that person. I don't really feel better myself, but I also don't feel bad using up my time, because once I finish it, it's like out of my mind. It's no longer a big deal. So I just kept trucking along. So it feels it's the nihilism / grind feeling where you're numb. You're living life each day becoming number and number. And numbing can stop you from feeling bad, but it can also stop you from feeling good. So the idea is you got to find some balance of ground where it's okay to feel bad, because you know when you feel bad, you also have the capacity to feel good, but in small doses. I would probably call it like microdosing. You microdose every once in a while, and then eventually you get to a point where, okay, well, I can dissociate myself from things when it's absolutely necessary. Like, for example, online is a brutal place. They'll come up to you and insult you out of the blue. It's out of your control. Solution to that, you dissociate. That's like, whatever. Out of sight, out of mind. But there are things where you can open yourself to being angered. And while you do that, you can remind yourself that opening yourself up to vulnerability and anger can also enable you to feel joy. So, yeah, one of the big reasons for dissociation is to keep your feelings consistent or staying pragmatic. If you want to stay like objective and pragmatic and like task oriented, dissociating that stuff numbs everything out. So you no longer get interrupted with, did I do a good job? Should I feel something? At the same time, the danger is that when you get too focused on that, you sap all the potential emotions out of it. So the highest encouragement is you gotta find something you're worth, something that's worth getting betrayed, and it would hurt. But if it works out, it makes you feel wonderful, right? So that's the idea. So you have to take risks again, and that's very scary, especially someone who's for myself, I wanted to be a professional. I was like a really professional person, but professionalism causes that too. Basically, if someone's mad at you, suck it up, compartmentalize, do your job, right? Over and over again. That's kind of it leads into a digression about work and balance, but I'm not sure what your situation where if you have a job that makes you confront these things. Jobs tend to be always viewed negatively, but at the same time, it is a balance for life. So when you're seeking pleasure in your personal time, work, it might seem like a negative thing. Most people would assert it as a negative thing because it's contrast with the pleasures of personal life, right? However, it is, I would say, a necessary component to being able to appreciate what pleasures are. So if you live in a life where you spend every day choosing what to do, that's what I mean by the dangers of modern society right now and internet behavior in general. You get to choose to do mostly everything. Like younger people get to choose everything. So there's no obligatory bad feelings, obligatory skill development. When you bump into people, you can compartmentalize. I don't like seeing this, so I'll never see it again. And then when it comes, I'll dissociate it away. So you don't have to confront anything anymore. You stay in a comfort zone. But the downside is what may feel good at first or feel like a affirmation of what some can do, when you do it long enough, it no longer feels rewarding anymore. Because you become normalized. It numbs the thing. So you have to destabilize, in my opinion. It's encouraged to destabilize yourself and resensitize yourself to things you're not comfortable with. That will incur stress. It will incur anxiety. But with stress, anxiety, pressure comes reward, happiness, joy, feeling of accomplishment. And gotta find discover something that gives you that little bit. And I would say little at a time. I call it microdosing. Is basically when you see an opportunity, you can find something that makes you feel something, you take it. But you don't like follow it for like hundreds of months or something. You don't have to commit to it. It's just microdosing, as in any opportunity you find, just prick yourself a little bit here and there, and it could eventually lead to something bigger. I would say most of, like, past a certain point in my career, I became very numb to everything. And now I do things to make sure I don't get dangerously numb to myself, because the moment you become numb to yourself is also the moment you stop self-improving, you stop developing skills for yourself, and you start losing motivation. And then everything just feels like grays. It sounds like you do something and you don't care, you habitually just don't care about what it happens just a few seconds later. Like, it's just whatever. That makes sense. I used to have anger issues around, okay, about a couple years ago. I wanted to fix it, so I consciously tried to catch myself in anger and try to calm myself. Yeah, so you're trying to normalize it. Yeah, I guess something worked the way I didn't. Yeah, so when you're constantly, it's this sounds really cliche, right? The whole bottling your uh bottling your emotions. The word I would use is you have practiced really, really well to suppress your anger, not necessarily to understand the anger. You were like, it's a lot of times the status quo stigmatize anger as just negative, but there's healthy anger. I'm sure someone else could explain this a lot more elaborate than I am, from a professional perhaps, but there's healthy anger, and then there's suppressed anger, and like violent anger. There's also, this healthy anger has intent and control. You might be thinking like, wow, that's an oxymoron, like controlled anger. Yeah, you can choose when to be angry. You can choose know when to appropriately be angry. So that's controlled intent anger. And that helps you sensitize yourself with having the capacity to still feel that. And that comes with all the complementary or opposite feelings. I would say it's a misnomer a little back where, like, especially for males, definitely for males in many countries, in actually even less so for the United States nowadays, it's actually for other countries, that there you can choose when to express it, and it should be it's not all inappropriate or counterproductive. Just that the status quo hasn't really had to apply that because they don't have generations of people until now where they can be completely removed from social environments. Anger can promote problem solving, not just create problems, it can solve problems. So that whole black and white of, oh, don't lose your temper, it's just like, when I was young, was very temperamental. But then I went through a phase of what I was concerned with dissociative personality. And then now I'm back to, I'm a little bit more animated. I think if I had to guess and ask someone from my younger years, like the quote unquote productive years, they'd probably say I'm far more animated now than I've been before. And it's not because I didn't feel that way when I was professional and stuff. I was suppressing it. I was suppressing it by saying, I can't feel that way. As opposed to, oh, I feel this way because X, Y, and Z is happening. So when you suppress something, you are passively negating something without understanding why it's happening. And then with that practice, you start to also dissociate your care for anything else. Like, you can have a level of self-awareness to know when you're actively being numb and being dissociative. But since you don't practice it, and you don't practice it because you spend most of your time suppressing it, it becomes very normal. Um, some there are rare people who thrive being numb to everything, but if you're concerned about this, it sounds like you're unhappy about it. So suppressing it is feeling having an environment. I would say number one source is having an environment you don't have to suppress those things. So knowing someone who don't mind you getting angry at them is a great support system to have, probably. Or saying things that you're scared to say because some people might stigmatize you or something, but having a safe environment, that would be a great place to start, enabling you to do that. But if it's suppressed, when you feel it bottled up, when you suppress something successfully, you don't have to feel anything. Bottling up, yeah, that's usually what some people would say. When you bottle it up and eventually it bursts, right? But here's the thing. When it bursts, if it's not violent enough, those people become happier. They become, that would be the point, the breaking point. As long as it's not violent enough and it's controlled and there's or not really controlled, but if there's a support system that supports the breaking point, if someone's suppressing their emotions, that event is the event that usually happens maybe later in adulthood that starts a new chapter in that person's life, generally speaking. But unfortunately, the stuff that we hear at a third hand are all those people where that created an event that was incredibly violent, right? Like incredibly reckless. I would say that's not actually the norm. It's just that's what you hear all the time because it's what shakes up. You know, we're talking about things that we don't want to mention too much, like acts of violence, acts of discrimination, that type of thing when it builds up too much, right? But generally speaking, it's a really classical cycle for individuals who are hyper focused on a certain quality of mindset, and then they spill over, and then they have an event and they're healthy individuals with an environment that supports them, and they start a new chapter in their life where they refine and take that point. So hopefully you don't feel that way, but generally speaking, if you become very good at dissociating, that is a form of suppression where it might not even feel consequential, but the consequence is feeling like nothing means anything anymore. So I don't know about you, but I actually think that's even more dangerous in some ways because there's no end to it. When you become so skilled at suppressing and dissociating, there isn't anyone that can reach you anymore because they wouldn't know. Like, it's the most, in my opinion, the scariest one, because that's kind of like, that's, I mean, I'm going to say this as lightly as possible. That's not a long distance to suicide. Like, and no one's going to know. Like, because they can't tell if you're angry or sad or anything because you aren't. You actually legitimately do not feel most of those things anymore. So, unlike the person who feels bottled up and the pressure's building up, eventually they'll reach a breaking point. And I would say commonly, so let's just say 60 to 70% of people will get pushback from their environment, and then they become healthy again. Like, they'll learn from the experience and whatnot, and usually turn out for the better. How early the bottle is broken is often the worst case scenario. Is at a therapist with a professional, right? The bottle's open. There you go, right? Um, they hold it in until they're near breaking point and they go seek help, right? Usually though, I would say the average person probably open up to a friend, maybe a loved one, open to a significant other, and eventually that happens. The floodgates just happen naturally, I would say. And those are the things you don't talk about. I would say it's very reasonable at around a certain age now where that dissociation happens pretty often. My friend talked to me a lot about venting and how useful it is for him and how he feels relief after it. Yeah. I can't relate to wanting to deliberately complain. Yeah, that's it. Yeah, you're dissociating you're trying to convince your like this is sort of victim blaming and I don't want to gaslight this. Um Instead of thinking of it that way, thinking about it that you deserve the right to do that. I know it sounds like a burdening, right? What you're rationalizing is it is a burden to the other person. At the same time, it might be the joy and the connection between another person. So you might be thinking, yeah, complaining is a stigma. It's a burden. It's something someone is taxing on another person, but it's also the remedy and the bonding force between people too. So being able to see more perspectives on the consequences of those types of actions can help you discover alternative ways of finding joy, anger, and purpose behind those things. The other things fitting well to vent for me, but I also can't fill my anger bottle up. It's like it's just not really there. Yeah, that's that sounds like dissociation. Yeah, sounds like chronic dissociation. You're become so rehearsed that it no longer feels like anything. And generally speaking, that's the polar opposite. You know, like we're talking about extreme cases, right? Those who are explosive, emotional all the time versus those who are completely absent of emotion. So you're kind of like really far at the one end. And the healthy balance is somewhere, it's a balance. So they're kind of on a spectrum. So you're looking for something like a 60-40 blend. You're looking for your balance of the things. But if you are perfectly happy, right, it's kind of hard to express when you have numbness. But if it's not interfering with your productivity or it's not triggering something in you, then I guess it's sustainable. But generally speaking, this is a complex relationship between bouncing back and forth. And uh, that's what I would describe was the difference between when I was a kid, which is all surface level. Like I was an angry, naive kid. Like I didn't know how to regulate it. Then I learned to regulate it. And all those years made me numb to like an incredible degree to the point where since I don't feel anything about myself, I don't take care of myself, right? There's no amount of stress or pain that can ever stop me from achieving my tasks because that's just it. I care very little about that. And then at some point, life felt lifeless. Like, the idea when I say, even now after 3 or 4 years of streaming, I have told people, I've mentioned before, like, my goal in life in general and doing this stuff is to find things that make me feel again. Because I think one skill that has this double edge, it's a good or bad thing, but I can tell you I'm honestly proficient at not feeling anything. Like I can definitely do that. I can compartmentalize really well. I'm not gonna say I'm suppressing anymore, or I'm not suppressing as obviously anymore. I'm actively understanding why I do things, like why I feel anger. And then understanding that is what's creating the consistency, as opposed to writing it off. Like just so the first thing I would typically encourage other people. Obviously, I'm not a professional, but as a friend, I would simply constantly just nag you or nag a person and ask, how does that make you angry? It sounds so cliche because that's kind of the first thing that you explore with a professional in a a sort of patient psychologist way. You ask the person to define those things. If you can't define those things, then you're writing them off. You're not actually trying to understand them. So that is a form of bottling up. When you, it could, like, one thing that could be frustrating, for example, your anger example, right? Is that why do you choose to ignore what the person said about venting and how useful it is? What makes it unbelievable to you? See, and you mentioned you can't relate because you don't want to deliberately complain about something and then exaggerate for relief. Why not? If you've already demonstrated that you understand that deliberately complaining in an exaggerated rate can lead to relief, what is stopping you from getting relief in that manner, right? Can you even deliberately complain about something? Have you attempted to try to do that? So there are many ways you can explore why things are happening. Saying them and just saying, well, that's that, so I have no reason to explore it, is suppressing. You're suppressing your investment in understanding yourself or the other person. So in both cases, how you rationalize it, in my opinion, I'm just reading in between the lines, I don't know how often you do these and stuff, is that you have thought something and that's just that. There's no practice, no active learning, no trial and error, no participation. You've rationalized it in a way that it doesn't need to be done because you don't need to see the results. You think you know the results. And that happens a lot with knowledge. So the more you know, it can promote that. Doing it is probably the, if I had to do a hot take, right? Thinking and knowing what may or may not happen is not doing the thing. So go up to someone and say, hey, you know what? I want to tell you how crappy X and Y is. That's just it. And you just do it. And then you reinvestigate how that made you feel. If it made you feel nothing, then sure. You can say it didn't make you feel nothing. But the act of doing it allows you to do it. Like, I always wondered, like, if I'm ever going to be good at humor, right? If I ever can do humor. So for the longest time, I just didn't participate in humor because I know that I was fairly certain that I'm not a humorous person. But since I never did it, of course I stay that way. Or it could be that when I do it, I don't meet my expectations and I'm actually pretty good at humor. So over time, still having to do it, let alone know it, is a first step to actually understanding those things for yourself. No one can, some people might be able to provide some answers that complement your answers, but it is a form of self-discovery. Being scared, like, that's a good one. I think being scared is one of the biggest ones when it comes to a more patriarchal society of old, where like you're playing a scary game, right? You're playing a horror game, and suddenly it's like, I'm not scared. So guess what? the best skill you can do from preventing you from being scared of anything, you dissociate. And I did that so well back in the day. You know, you go through like a hayride and lots of noises are yelling at you and jump scares and stuff. Not I wouldn't even get the way I did it to like prevent myself from jump scares and loud noises and stuff. I dissociate myself completely from the environment. Like I was thinking of something else entirely. I didn't even take in stimuli. Like when there's a loud noise suddenly pop up, I didn't even know that loud noise happened. That's how strong dissociation can happen. You can legitimately just block yourself out of everything. And nowadays, no. Like I played Subnautica, right? I was talking to Smoke the other day when I was playing Subnautica. It's like I was embracing the fear. I was embracing the terror instead of just saying, you're playing through a video game. It's like, this is a video game. This is a video game. I'm not going to suspend my disbelief that this is a video game. So I'm not going to be scared because I know it's a video game. Or this character died in the video game. It's a video game. They're fake characters. They're fake people. I'm not going to feel sad for them because they don't exist. That's a good way to rationalize, right? But you are suppressing something. It's just it doesn't feel like it because you can rationalize it. And I've often said this little hot take about me is when someone compliments me, it's like, oh yeah, you find you're a very objective person. You provide reasonable logic when you explain things. And my only thought when I hear that as a compliment, right? I would say I take it as a compliment. However, what I see or remind myself is there's a big downside to that. When you're striving to be objective all the time and rational and logic and trying to know about what's correct, what facts are, is it takes the emotion, passion, emotion, like it completely makes you unpracticed in emotional intelligence. And that includes to others and yourself. So you will become more numb. You will sound very cold. That's what how I describe myself. Like, I always have to apologize in advance just in case, because occasionally when people talk to me, I'm very cold. As in, yeah, these are the truths and stuff. Sorry, I can't relate to you at all. Like, I can't empathize with you at all. But I really am trying. That type of thing comes up a little bit less now for me. But many times, I would say 80% of my interactions with people, my first thought in my mind is I can't empathize with you. I just don't feel that way. I know all the logic that's involved in it, the statistics behind it. I don't want to tell you it either because I don't want to dwarf your personality or rob you of your emotions. And overall, it got to the point where I actually envy people. That's ironic because envy is a great emotion for someone who spends most of their time feeling nothing. So I start, feeling jealousy would be interesting. Again, like, it's been a while since I felt jealousy, right? Or coveting someone things like, oh man, or like, oh, this person got lucky. So how I work with that is I try to feel good for them, as opposed to it's harder to feel out of, like, I don't even want to touch malice, but there are emotions that I would keep away still most of the time. And anger is probably one of the big ones. The reason I really don't like complaining in an exaggerated way is because people around me express a lot of discomfort with me doing that. Okay. And I mean, they did that directly. It's not me picking their behavior and interpreting it in my way. So I thought that I don't have a choice, and so I don't know what a professional would say, but I know what a couple popular, like, publicly accessible people who are technically professional would say too, you have the wrong company. What I mean by that is they can be your friends for other contexts and reasons, but you don't have an appropriate support system to enable you to do that. And here's another possibly further hot take. If you have well, you can find other people, right? Your family provides certain things. They don't have it's difficult to it's very unrealistic to assume that when you are obligated to have relationships with someone like a family member, that they can provide and be appropriate for all your needs, right? That's why we have families, friends, co-workers, colleagues. They provide different facets of someone's life, and your family members do too, along with yours. And the idea is finding an appropriate medium for that. And also, here's the irony with family, right? That dissociation and then reinforcement of what's right and wrong is kind of what you're doing with how you're feeling. You have a right way of doing things. Like, and it's reinforced by your family, which your family probably feels similarly. And it's a one-way thing. It's not a mutual thing. So like being angry is bad, right? Being angry in a complaining way is bad. So you will inherently reinforce that to someone else the same way your family members are reinforcing it to you. It's a one-way thing. It's not a mutual back and forth. It's just a one-way. There's zeros and ones. So in order to find people like that, you have to be able to also see people like that. Unfortunately, this is where in my opinion, the chicken or the egg thing comes into play, right? You have to be able to do it. So how do you do it? Well, you have to find people that help you realize that, or maybe gain inspiration in order to do that in the first place. So there is an element of luck involved. And that's what you mean by unlucky, I guess. Yeah, there is an element of luck involved. But being proactive and opening up your opportunities for that is a start. And that's usually, unfortunately, when it comes to luck, you have to put yourself in uncontrollable situations. That involves being in an environment that you didn't choose. When you choose the environment, it's going to be based on what you know and what you experience. And luck may feel like unluck all the time because you're only choosing the environments that you want to be in. To contrast, for me, the reason with my breakthroughs about my emotional intelligence is because I was in an environment that I have to be in. As in, it was prescribed to me. It was imposed upon me. Obligations were imposed upon me. My life was not just my choice. And because of that, it might feel unlucky, but I also got lucky. Because more things could happen to me when I have less control over it. When you have more control over it, well, you're just going to get whatever you get. So in this situation, unfortunately, since you only get to choose to be around people who are like you, and people who are like you tends to be attracted to you, it's more of an inward interest. It's more of an introspection now. If you want someone who doesn't think like you so that you can find a solution, right? You want to change, you have to find people that are different from you now, which is difficult if you're only choosing to be around people you want to be around. And that's tough because when you're being around people you don't want to be, what do? You feel ambivalence, you feel fear, you feel frustration. But over time, right, when you expose to that, it becomes normalized too. So then you belong to 2 different types of people. You get used to 2 different types of people. Then, since you've done that, what's a third one? What's a fourth type? What's a fifth type? So the idea is to break the mold, but it has to be small microdoses, in my opinion. I wouldn't say go out and expect to make a friend that is exactly the opposite of you. That would be setting yourself up for the vicious cycle, which is the negative reinforcement, which is why diets, like crash diets, hustle culture, like 1, 2, 3, 5 step programs fall really terribly. And what I mean by fall really, they work as intended. The ones that are greatly convicted and incredibly like with great conviction and desperation, those people succeed. So that's why they have low success rates, because it requires a really high thing. The more soft thing is to do it very, very slowly. So none of those are advertisable. Like, hey, here's a 3-year program on how to microdose into a sustainable habit. That's a hard sell, and it probably costs a lot of money too. That's a lot of upkeep. So all the hustle things work really well, but it's applied and applicable to a very small percentage of people who are like just desperate out of their mind and have the proper conviction to do so. Crash diet is the same as well. So now we're saying it's more like spend like 10 minutes with someone you don't like, or spend 10 minutes absolutely trying your best to listen to something you can't possibly believe in for 10 minutes a day, right? Then try 20 minutes, then 30 minutes. But we're talking about weeks and months. So like tell yourself, every 10 minutes a day, I'm going to watch someone play a puzzle game or something. Or it's just small steps that are outside your comfort zone. So that's kind of the whole touch grass thing, right? When a parent is trying to get a child to explore because they've closed themselves off, it's natural for a younger person to close off once they know enough for them to sustain. But inherently, unfortunately, that stuff that you close off, it basically puts a cap on you as a person. And when you place a cap on the person, all that stuff that's already bottled in, it's eventually going to get watered out, as in you're going to get too used to it. And when you get used to it, it no longer provides a emotional stimuli anymore. So then you sort of go out a little, grab something new, put it into your cap, and that's going to get watered out after a while. And then you keep grasping for a little bit at a time. Alternatively, you could be like me or similar to me, where nah, I'm just not going to stay in my bubble anymore. That's how I did it. But again, I'm more the hustle culture. I was more responsive to the hustle culture, because my mental meltdown is that whole bottle bursting thing. So when I say burnout, that was my burnout episode. I burned everything out. Like, it was a crisis. Like, I went through a crisis. Like, I was underweight, I was barely sleeping, I was married to my education, right? So that's something that will eventually happen healthily. Like, what I mean is, I stuck it out a lot longer and it got a lot worse. But most people's breaking points are a bit earlier, and that's when they start refining. But it sounds like you probably leapfrogged over it, which is what I mean by the internet generation. The internet doesn't provide a breaking point. The internet will constantly feed back on you. So like, this makes you feel good. All right, we'll provide more of it. All right, it doesn't provide the same amount. Can you give me more? Eventually, it's not enough, right? Then you go numb. Almost seems like nothing ever phases you anymore. Nothing ever triggers you. Nothing ever makes you feel better anymore. All that becomes desensitized because you only do that thing. The internet only provides the only things you choose to see. You can't walk outside of a city and suddenly, I don't know, someone flicks you off because, well, you can't help but see it because you occupy the same environment. The internet doesn't do that. Like, heck, the biggest example I can see for the internet to help someone is pop-ups and ads. That's probably the closest thing. And even those, nowadays, is targeted towards you. So the business models are, they want to target ads you want to see towards you, and pop-ups that interest you based on your activity. So even those things are no longer like random. Sometimes they're random. They're the closest thing to going outside and touching grass. And when I mean touching grass, I don't mean exercising and stuff. I mean going out and seeing houses, seeing trees, seeing an annoying motorcyclist deciding to ramp up and blow your ears out with their their Harley Davidsons. The randomness. So when you remove happenstance from your life, you do not feel distability, like ambivalence, like mood swings or mood changes. And since you don't ever have to deal with that anymore, you are also not great at it anymore. You get rusty. So you'll get, yeah, now you're not suppressing anger, you just don't feel anger. So what happens when you ever get angry again? It's going to be disastrous because you won't no longer know how to deal with anger anymore because you never have to deal with it. Yeah, that's kind of like the weird thing, right? So how do you know if you're happy anymore? You'll stop knowing that. I kid you not. When I got my, I don't think I've ever expressed this, but before, when I got my PhD, I felt no different than all the years before it. By the time I received my PhD, I didn't even feel a sense of relief at all. Like, I was so far gone when it came to feeling anything. It's like, oh yeah, it's another day. That goes with birthdays. I still do it. That goes with birthdays, my parents' birthday, like celebrations. I go through the ropes. I can appreciate and communicate. This is a great day for celebration. Like I see other people enjoying it. And the first thing I tell myself is, it'd be great if I understand how that feels. Like, I see someone playing Elden Ring, right? And they're just losing their heads and going off the walls. Like, I'm learning. I'm trying to remember what it's like to be that way. And then this game indirectly is providing that. It's scratching something that I've forgotten for a very long time. It makes you really great, very composed, and it also makes you very good at certain jobs, like being a scientist, what you're doing right now, which is why I became that way a lot, because when it comes to analyzing data, I don't look for data I want to look for. I look for the data that it says, right? Like, I'm not concerned with publishing great things. I'm concerned with how accurate those things are. But it didn't make you good. It didn't make you good at all. Like what I mean by that is, it made you no better than having the luxury of the stuff that takes you that takes you there. So I was not concerned with being someone who's seen as a skilled person, and that's what I meant. That's what I thought you meant by the imposter syndrome. The imposter syndrome, just to clarify, is a state of mind and it kind of goes in hand with dissociative personality disorders, where they're kind of tied together a little bit, where I stop caring about how good people think I am or how much value I have. I just wanted to do the job, right? I wanted to do the work. I wanted to collect the data. But then, because of that type of forced non-feeling thing, I also forgot how possibly good I am. So what happens is the imposter syndrome happens is when you start explaining things to other people, like your audience, you start teaching, right? You start explaining to something, you basically lost the ability to understand that whatever you're saying is really hard to follow because you have skills that other people don't have, but you don't process that anymore. You don't think it's abnormal to be where you are. And that happens in kids a lot. It's just a little different context. Basically, like I don't know, the top 5 OSU player goes around and says, "Yeah, just practice hard like me. Just do it. It's easy." That's an imposter syndrome. That's what happens when you spend a really, really long time in a state and it no longer becomes special or emotionally important. A lot of times that's associated with depression and distress. And even then, that's better than normalizing it to numbness. So when there are two negatives that comes up all the time, when you get really good at something or you invest in something very long, you either get really distressed because there's not enough progress, which is depression, like self-deprecation. I'm not good enough because I'm garbage, I'm not getting better, but that's losing scope of the perspective. That's one of the more common ones. But the other one is you got so used to doing it, it no longer feels important anymore. And then because of those two things, you're so focused on maybe your self-deprecation, or you get numb, you stop forgetting how extraordinary you are. Because the state that you're in is caused by how extraordinary your skills are. And that's the imposter syndrome. That's when someone outside of it would ask an expert something, and the expert's like, well, you just do this and this and this and this, and then the beginner, the person asking is like, I have no idea what you're talking about. Like, can you simplify it for me? And then the expert would say, oh, okay, I'll do it. And it's like highly unintelligible to the person. That's imposter syndrome. And then it's even worse when you have both of them feeding on each other. The imposter syndrome is most identifiable when someone says, no, I'm garbage, when you're top 500. Right? That's the imposter syndrome. And it's kind of associated with the whole dissociating behavior when something stays constant for too long. So if you're always at the top of your game, you become dissociative over time. And you also you become at risk of the imposter syndrome because you have no feedback anymore. You're up there, you're alone. There might be some select people around you, but you don't even interact with them. And the majority of your interactions are with people that you can't empathize with. That's dissociation. So that's kind of full circle, but that's where I was. Like, getting a PhD is no walk in the park, for sure. I agree. But I found other meanings to PhD. I wanted to find how PhD relates to other people. So I define what PhD means to me in the context of others. How do I describe to another person in a relatable term that keeps me grounded and relatable to other people? So I don't use PhD as a way where I would say, I'm just going to spout up a bunch of jargon and nonsense that dissociates me from other people. No, I spend most of my time finding new ways to reinterpret my experiences, my knowledge, and my maybe emotional intelligence to as many people as I can. And that keeps me grounded with trying to feel the way other people feel. And then if I can't, you're probably going to hear me classically say, sorry, I can't empathize with you right now, but I understand how those things are connected. I just don't feel anything. I can't feel the same way you do. I may never do, but I am telling you I'm trying to, but I'm failing to do so. And that's kind of the act of doing it. So I've attempted. I've acknowledged that I've attempted to try to feel the way. Like, for example, social justice. I say this a lot. I just don't feel the same way. When someone says, yeah, I've been working so hard, I deserve this, I can't relate to you at all. You don't deserve anything in life. Things happen on merit. Like, if they don't happen, it doesn't mean you deserve it. That's yeah, like I have trouble with that. Like, that sounds cold, but you know, like, or things like, oh, this guy did a bad thing, that's a bad person, they only deserve bad karma in the future. It's like, no, that just doesn't check out at all. Like, I can't even feel, or the social justice stuff, like, this person did so many bad things, they deserve to be punished. And then when it happens, like, darn straight it happens, it makes those people feel better. I just can't relate to that. I only feel sadness. It's a person who done bad, get punished for doing bad, so they will continue to do bad things. Right? Like, if you have a person who's conditioned to be exposed to bad things, normalize bad things, and your solution is to impart bad things on the person, well, naturally they would just rebel and continue to, like, statistically wise, the logic would check out that that person will continue to be bad. And that's social justice. Like, that's what I would say, the vengeful, like, type of social justice. And this game, just as a side note, this game does really well with the idea of redemption and, like, exposing someone to something different in order to change them, as opposed to exposing them to the same so that they can do the same better, expecting a change. Here's a great example. It's a double standard. For bad things, you often expose them to the consequences, which is a bad thing ultimately, in order to change. That to me is cis. It's the same. It's the same. That's still the same feedback for the person. So what happens if you told a person who's just so negative that they're awesome? Try to get them to believe that they're good at something. What are the likelihoods of that being more successful? It is statistically more successful, actually. Like, understanding human condition, it is breaking the feedback loop is statistically far more successful, but it rarely is it ever used. It's like misery deserves company. It's usually it's called positive reinforcement, like positive feedback, but the positive is saying it's the same stimuli. So for example, when someone's down, to empathize with another person to feel comfort, they would find another person suffering the same thing, and that would provide comfort. It's like, that's all right. I still think that's just baseline feeding back, because it's not introducing something new while being protective. So what you're looking for, in my opinion, would be someone who has a different problem but feel just as sad as you. So they become, the empathy is still there, but they don't have the same problems. Not necessarily identical problems. And the idea behind that is there's a likelihood that other person has something new. And through this connection you have, you can complement each other and find inspiration in each other. So if someone's bad at sprinting and someone's bad at long distance running, and you put them together and they both feel bad about how they're not great at those things, you have separate things. this person's running could, this person sprinting could provide solace and like inspiration for that person sprinting, and then vice versa, right? Even in the smallest intent. And so this goes back to the whole, what would I suggest? I would suggest something different, but it has to be something that you're willing to commit to in a consistent basis. And you already said you would prefer to take up a year's program. Like, you would rather choose a few year program, at least that settles a plan for a few years. Oh, I see. Well, it's a process. It's a long process. And the only thing I can really say to someone who feels numb is you got to find out how to make yourself feel worth it again. And what I mean by feel worth it, it has to be demonstrated through action. It could be speech, it could be dialogue, it could be written, it could be action. You have to still prove to someone, convince someone that you actually care about yourself. And that sounds weird, but saying you care about yourself doesn't strike me as convincing, because you stop caring about the things you do already. And that is a tough one, because I, without a shred of the doubt, at the turn of my 30s, right, maybe around 31, 32, I can easily say in my age now, I did not care about myself. Like, I didn't at all. Like, some people on the outside would say you had a good career goal, like you got good grades, you made money, you published papers, etc. You held yourself up professionally. That sounds like you cared about your career. It's like, yeah, your career is not you. Like, I know how that sounds, but I compartmentalize myself. I dissociate myself from the career. The career was not a reflection of myself anymore. At some point, I lost it. It was gone. So I had to successfully demonstrate to other people that I care about myself. That involves trying to be selfish if you don't think selfishness is sufficient, right? One of the hardest tasks I would have to do is telling people no, or making myself unavailable. I still have kind of trouble doing that, because I tend to still just constantly make myself available. And I would probably tell them, like, no, it's not a problem. It's like, the problem is I'm not lying that it's not a problem. But another person, if there was a healthy person looking at me, that is a problem. If I feel nothing about spending my time giving, that's not sustainable. If you keep giving, and I say this, but I don't practice it very well. Like, I would say I still disproportionately give my time up freely, and I don't process an inconvenience. In fact, that's kind of a nice thing that you still have. You still process some frustration from the act of giving and sacrificing your time to help someone if they're not responsive to you. That's kind of an emotional response that you expressed at another time that I didn't. Like, I can't relate to that. And I offered you my perspective on it, right? But in retrospect now, if you're already feeling the way you are dissociatively, it's probably healthier if you hold on to that frustration. The idea that your time is precious, right? And that you don't want to waste your time. That's great. That's a example of self-value. So you still have some perspective and some perception of your own worth. When you become super numb, you will no longer think you're worth anything, and you just stop doing everything. And what I mean by stop doing everything is not going through the motion, not like eating and stuff. Eating, sleeping, those are almost obligatorily. I'm talking about when you do an action, you stop living in the action. As in, you stop processing what that action means to you anymore. That's like playing Osu over and over again, and then one day you're just like, it doesn't give anything anymore. and you did it for the 100th time, and then when you get that 100th time, you didn't feel the reward or the relax from it at all. That is no longer living in the moment. You are no longer processing and actively getting anything from it. And sure enough, it'll fade very quickly. Like, off to the next FC. This FC has no more baggage. It's not significant anymore. And soon enough, you probably forget how it felt there, and it's just off to the next goal. That's kind of the whole downside of goal-oriented, like, lifestyle. Like, if I don't reach my goal, nothing's a valuable time. It's ends justifies the means thing. That's why sometimes I find something like OC very valuable. You physically can't see a score you like every day. That rarely happens, so it's very special every time. That can work. And you can do other things like OSU. It doesn't necessarily have to be OSU. I know how that sounds because it would require you to leave your comfort zone. But that's kind of the idea. I can understand that with PhD, the journey is so long that you're kind of forced to acclimate. Yeah, but here's the thing. It inherently plays to that. But generally speaking, I didn't have the guidance or the environment that would help me with that. It's something unique to my case in that way. Because before that, most people that managed to get to where I was from my background would have been exposed to a family or a professional background or even friends that are gone through that experience. So I didn't have inspiration or primers that I would meet. So I have always been really grateful to the people around me, the mentorship and stuff. But I was, again, the imposter syndrome. When I was younger at that time, I didn't think I tried convincing myself I was no different than any one of them. Like, I got there, everyone else worked just as hard and whatnot, but in retrospect, I was very different from the majority of the students. My background came from ignorance. Like, all that stuff, it was more like passion and naivety that got me there. The other kids, like the vast majority of those kids, they didn't come there with just naivety and ignorance. They actually came there with pedigree, legacy, exposure, knowledge. So when they got there, what did they do that was different from me? They didn't acclimate to it. They went out weekends, they went drinking, they socialized, they celebrated. What did I do? I worked every single day. I just kept working. That's all I knew how to do. So I came from a background of working, and I just kept working. I had no knowledge of how much time I have for myself. If I have any time, I just kept working. Because I don't know. There's no information coming in. And that's kind of like the internet. I was stuck on campus, so I stopped taking in new information. I stopped doing new things during that time. I just kept doing science, kept taking in more science. Had no idea why I kept falling asleep in seminars and like stuff. So all that stuff is because I have no new stimuli, no new way of engaging myself to make myself better at it. So over time, I worked harder, but I didn't learn more. I didn't get more efficient. Like, I got worse. I worked harder to get less over time. And at some point, I worked so hard that I couldn't work sustainably anymore. So at some point, when you don't learn new things and you don't expose yourself to new things, you become far less efficient. And over time, it's best just to stop spinning the wheels, take a break from it, do something else, come back, adapt those new things, and you just magically become reconditioned again. That's kind of what dissociation falls under. When you get so used to doing something and you get really good, it often leads to dissociation. And especially if the skill is dissociating yourself. then that just feeds on itself because it's so good. It's so easy over time. It's not easy at first. You might not even remember when it wasn't easy, but you sort of did. You said 4 or 5 years ago you had anger issues, right? Like you were managing the anger issue. So you can still remember when it used to be it, but I don't think you could empathize with that very well anymore because you become so practiced in one thing. And personally, that's kind of my take on the internet generation. Uh, if you spend more than your vast majority of your life, like what I mean by lifetime, your conscious lifetime on the internet, or like on a lifestyle that only provides just what's interesting to you, you have to be worried, or at least what I would like to encourage is that at least people are aware when you write down how much time you spent, how much of that time did you spend in your control, and then how much of the stimuli is repeated consistent stimuli versus novelty. At some point it'll become so much that those things are the things you do every single day, and they won't like, it's human condition in my opinion, unless you have some sort of special maybe genetic disposition or something, or psychological disposition. Those things will inherently become dull. You can stop doing them, do something else, and come back, and it won't be dull anymore. The idea is to introduce inconsistency when the thing you love or the thing you're interested in stops providing it. So one great example for me, I'll give you a personal anecdote, I guess. I really like country music. Like, we're talking about Kekona country music, right? Like ye old American country music. But I really got into it, and then it just didn't hit anymore. So I stopped. Not because I'm moving on from it. I'm just interested in something else. Like, I filled it in with something else. And now I'm kind of going back to it again. That's kind of how the human condition works, in my opinion. So that was a really long digression, but what are the take-homes that I would, in my opinion, in my non-professional opinion, is microdosing and seeing opportunities to just feel anything. So it has to be something significantly enough different, and that you're willing to consistently and intentionally plan to do, and then start from there. And then you read yourself. Like, everything's about reading yourself. So, and I don't have to say any of that because you clearly have exercised plenty of self-awareness. You don't have, there's no need for self-awareness in this case. The idea is you have to intentionally do it. And it's anything really, because I don't know what you actually do normally. So yeah. All right. now we're gonna get back to this. And then I need to go to the bathroom. But hopefully that is something. Maybe there's something in there.